Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
This is the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle, and it is time to drop some knowledge. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me is Will Keys, as always, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. And Will, you have a birthday coming up here very soon. Do you have anything fun planned that you can look forward to that our listeners might be interested in hearing about?
Yeah, it's the big 21, so I'm heading out to San Francisco to see the Rockies-Giants game on Wednesday afternoon. Very excited to try my first beer and hopefully watch the Rockies win.
We all know that's not going to be your first beer. You just spent time abroad in Ireland, dude, where it's legal to drink when you're like 6.
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty true.
Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddle up. Over 180,000 different titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Again, that's audibletrial.com/huddle up. This is a product and a service I use on a pretty much daily basis. For those of you, or those of us, who don't always have the time to sit down and actually turn the pages and read books, Audible provides the opportunity, whether it's during your commutes, getting your yard work done, cooking in the kitchen, whatever it might be, to get your favorite books under the belt, consume them in a way that allows you to multitask. And that's what I love about Audible. I've been a consistent member, I think, going back now about 18 months. So check it out. It's also a great way to help support the show. Go to audibletrial.com/huddle up. Now, we're here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, and we need your help. This show cannot grow without you. And each week, we ask that you take some time, if you've not done this before, to rate the show on iTunes and Stitcher. And there's a big reason for it. iTunes and Stitcher, they both have algorithms, which are based on users not only downloading and listening to the show, right, but also rating and commenting. And I want to give some props to those of you who have taken our calls to action to heart and have taken the time to rate and comment. It's very much appreciated. It helps us out tremendously in terms of the show being able to reach new listeners. So to each one of you tuning in right now, we ask that you take a second, rate the show on Stitcher if you're an Android user, and on iTunes if you're an Apple guy or gal. Follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod and at Mile High Huddle. Also, take a second and like Mile High Huddle on Facebook. We are knee-deep in the dead time on the NFL calendar, but Will and myself, along with Nick Kendall and Carl Dumler, who we're going to hear from here in a few minutes, are not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to continue to bring you compelling Broncos content until training camp kicks off at the end of July, and you're not going to want to miss a single episode. Now, today we are going to focus on the AFC West, the division that now boasts the NFL's highest paid defensive player and the highest paid offensive player, or player period, really. Von Miller, of course, has the richest defensive contract in the league, but the Oakland, soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders just made quarterback Derek Carr the highest paid player in the history of the NFL. Carr signed a 5-year, $125 million contract, which included a $12.5 million signing bonus and a little over $70 million guaranteed. Now, Will, as you pointed out in the piece that you published on Friday over at milehighhuddle.com, Carr went 10-21 in his first 2 years as a starter before he really broke out in 2016, leading the Raiders to their first playoff berth since, I think it was 2003, when they went to the Super Bowl and lost to Tampa Bay. Now, before Carr suffered a broken leg in Week 16, of course, he had the Raiders poised to win the division, sitting at 12-3. He was a legitimate MVP candidate, and honestly, 2017, it would have been the final year of his contract, so it made sense for the Raiders. It behooved them for the front office to get a deal done rather than take the kind of Washington Redskins approach with Kirk Cousins and franchise tag him to the point of aggravation. Now, there are a few things that I want to break down about this contract and, of course, the overall ramifications. But, Will, what's your immediate gut reaction to the Derek Carr deal?
Yeah, so it's a monster deal, but I guess my take overall is that they didn't really have any other choice. What else could they have done? There's such a shortage of quarterbacks pretty much at all times in the NFL that they have almost all of the leverage in negotiations with their front offices. There's never more than, I don't know, and it's kind of up for debate, but there's never more than like 13, 14, or 15 franchise quarterbacks that you'll hang your hat on and that you're comfortable paying long term.
True.
And Derek Carr, he's not the best quarterback in the league, even though he's being paid like it. And that's just kind of, that's a product of the evolving quarterback market.
Yep.
But if you have that guy, even after 3 years, you have to pay him. You have to pay him. There's no getting around it. And it's kind of a sinkhole that it creates for the rest of your roster, but you don't have any other choice. That's kind of the reality of the NFL right now.
Well, and as you posited in the piece, Will, perhaps last year was Oakland's best opportunity to actually make some hay while the sun was shining with Derek Carr. They had him on a relatively team-friendly rookie contract, paying him second-round money. Khalil Mack, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, was still on his rookie deal, which hasn't changed yet. The Raiders were able to allocate a huge portion of their cap over the last couple of years in 3 elite-level offensive linemen in Rodney Hudson, Kelechi Osemele, and, of course, Donald Penn. We saw how a dominant offensive line can impact the course of a game in that disappointing Week 9 loss on Sunday Night Football, where the Raiders basically ran roughshod over the Broncos' defense. Now, add to that Marshawn Lynch, and it becomes even more grim for the Broncos to defend. But the Oakland defense was far from dominant, but they had most of the pieces in place, or a lot of the pieces in place anyway, to, at the very least, complement their explosive offense. Had Derek Carr not gotten hurt, there's a good chance that they would have made some noise in the playoffs rather than going out with a whimper under Connor Cook. But it's kind of like getting back to what you talked about in the piece, Will. Like the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to accomplish a decade ago with Ben Roethlisberger, the Seahawks did it in 2013 and 2014 with Russell Wilson, and even now the Dallas Cowboys have the opportunity with Dak Prescott. The Raiders had that chance to catch lightning in a bottle and compete for a world championship with an upper echelon quarterback on the cheap. Now, those teams were able to invest in other areas of the roster to build that complete team while the quarterback was making relative peanuts. It's one of those, and you kind of alluded to this a minute ago, it's kind of one of those be careful what you wish for scenarios, because every team needs and wants and covets an elite quarterback. That's the priority number one cornerstone for every NFL franchise. But once you get one, you have to pay him. So you'd better have, what that means to me, you'd better have a great GM who can find diamonds in the rough on draft day. Keep the roster stocked with cheap impact players, or else you end up with a top-heavy roster like the Peyton Manning Colts of yesteryear. The Colts, they got over the hump once, but year after year, they would dominate the regular season only to fail in the playoffs, just really because of lack of depth, and overall just the roster was never well-rounded. The Broncos got it done, I think, Will, making it to those 2 Super Bowls and, of course, winning one with Peyton, because John Elway did a phenomenal job in personnel acquisition, whether it was via the draft or with, impact or value free agents. And I've always respected Oakland GM Reggie McKenzie, but it remains to be seen whether he can follow suit with Carr, now that he's making the big bucks. And Khalil Mack, of course, will poised to make that Von Miller money soon.
Yeah, and I think Khalil Mack's probably going to have to – they're going to have to pay him post-Von Miller money. So Von Miller's making a little over $20 million a year, and they're going to have to pay him more because, I don't know if you and I would agree with it, but a lot of the league sees Khalil Mack as a better player than Von Miller. And he's got the hardware to back it up, winning Defensive Player of the Year last year. Whether or not you and I agree with that, which, we're a little biased, but I don't know if we do agree.
No.
But getting back to the quarterback situation, it's a total catch-22 because you need a quarterback if you want to compete year after year. We talk about the Broncos won the Super Bowl without an elite level starting quarterback, and it's a great story, but it's an anomaly, and it's not going to happen every year, and you can't rely on that model.
Yep.
So you need to, if you are lucky enough to get a quarterback who's a talent like Derek Carr, like Russell Wilson, like Ben Roethlisberger was early in his career, you need to capitalize while he's on his rookie contract, especially with quarterbacks like Carr and Wilson who are paid as second-round and third-round players.
Right, they didn't have the fifth-year options.
Right. And, the Steelers got that with Roethlisberger, and the Washington Redskins too. We see how, that's going. They've had to franchise them 2 years in a row because they didn't have that 5th round option either.
Right.
But the Broncos won in 2015, not completely, but a big reason why is because John Elway convinced Peyton Manning to take a pay cut. And that allowed them to, round out their offensive line with guys like Evan Mathis.
Yeah.
But I think the reason that he was able to do that is because the Broncos won in 97 and 98, kind of because Elway did the same thing and he took a pay cut. That allowed them to sign Neil Smith and get a guy like Howard Griffith who helped out Terrell Davis. And I think, Elway probably relied on that experience when he was trying to talk Manning into dropping that number from, I think, what was it, 18 or 19 million?
19 down to
16 or 17.
He dropped it from 19 to 15, and then he had those $2 million escalators. But the question, so he ended up by winning the Super Bowl, getting back to 19. But as you talked about in that piece Friday, only 17.5 of how they structured the payment to Manning actually counted against that 2015 year salary cap.
Right, and that's a big advantage. If that's the difference between signing Evan Mathis in the preseason and not being able to get him and relying on, rookie Max Garcia throughout the season, that's a big deal. And that's potentially worth a couple of games swinging, especially in a season where so many games came down to, 1 or 2 possessions.
Let's compare this with the Derek Carr signing, or not signing, but extension, to Denver's situation, as you kind of did in your written piece, Will. The Broncos, of course, you look at it on paper, and there's not many analysts who would say it's not a loaded roster. It's balanced, it's deep at key positions, with only a couple of exceptions. The only thing really missing is a bona fide quarterback. And we keep talking about the development of Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, but the Super Bowl window is still open for the Broncos. It's not like Oakland's situation where they were rebuilding and could afford to let Derek Carr go through the trial and error process as a starter for a couple years. The Broncos are set up to win now, which will certainly impact the coach's decisions on who wins the starting job. But still, the Broncos can't get it done without an upper echelon quarterback, in my mind, Will. And I'm still of the opinion that if the Broncos want Paxton Lynch to develop into that type of franchise quarterback that Derek Carr is, they're going to have to play him come what may. Now, the caveat, of course, is that if Trevor Siemian is leaps and bounds better than Paxton Lynch during training camp in the preseason, you can't just grandfather Lynch into the starting lineup, because you do that at the risk of losing the belief and emotional investment of your veterans. So really the onus is on Lynch to at least be as consistent as Siemian. And if he can, the Broncos have to rip off the Band-Aid, and this is my opinion, start him and let the chips fall. Because even if it takes a few weeks for Lynch to acclimate to a starter's life in the pros, the Broncos have the roster around the quarterback and the defense, of course, to pick up much of that slack. Now, on the flip side, you could make a similar argument for Siemian. If the Broncos want to win now and they want to capitalize on that roster, etc., Siemian is the most ready to play. And I know that kind of tends to be where your analysis flows most of the time, Will, but can Siemian be the difference maker that gets him over the hump? For me, that's where I have some misgivings about Trevor Siemian.
Well, there's a couple of things that need to happen. They need to be better up front. Obviously, they were pretty poor last year, and I think Trevor Siemian did a good job, all things considered. Yeah. And they need to run the ball a little bit better. So if they can do those two things, and if you get kind of an incremental improvement from Trevor Siemian from year 2 to year 3, then I think that I don't know if they're good enough to win the Super Bowl in year 3 with Trevor Siemian, but I think they're a playoff team if those 2, maybe 3 things happen.
Yeah.
But then we think about with Paxton Lynch, and this is kind of what the Broncos ran into with Brock Osweiler. If you don't know what you have by the time a quarterback's rookie contract runs out, and Osweiler's a little different because they didn't have that 5th round option, but if you don't know what you have by the time that first contract expires, you're kind of just throwing out money into the dark. And the Broncos did get lucky that the Texans offered Osweiler more. But at some point, you do have to see what you have with Lynch before you commit to him in the future. And that's where the whole Trevor Siemian monkey wrench comes into play, because I don't think the Broncos counted on that when they drafted Paxton Lynch.
I almost, I hate to say this, but I almost wish the Broncos wouldn't have drafted Paxton Lynch, because if they hadn't, not only would there not be this quarterback controversy, but Trevor Siemian would have, I mean, he has a lot of the skill set and talents that are required to play quarterback at the pro level. We can sit and debate, whether he has the type of ceiling as some of the more elite players in the league do. But Trevor Siemian, if it was between him and Kyle Sloter and all that, I mean, it would be a much easier path. There'd be a lot less noise around the team, and the Broncos could just kind of go about their business almost as if they had signed Brock Osweiler. He would have been the no-brainer successor to Peyton Manning, and things would have just moved forward if Osweiler would have stuck around. But now with Trevor Siemian, the Broncos, again, they're back in that controversy, which creates so much drama, creates so much scrutiny, detracts from what the team is trying to accomplish as a collective. You throw Paxton Lynch now into that, and who knows, maybe he'll go on to make everyone grateful that the Denver Broncos took that, traded up to get him in the first round and all that. Maybe that day will come, but right now it's like we're still waiting for that defining moment for Paxton Lynch to throw down the gauntlet and say, yo, dude, this is my team. I'm the first rounder. Back off, Trev.
I find myself also kind of thinking that same thing, that I wish they had never drafted Paxton Lynch, even though that I love Paxton Lynch when he was at Memphis. I watched that Ole Miss game, and I kind of just fell in love with him after that, as I think a lot of people did. But at the same time, what would we have to talk about? The Denver Broncos industry would absolutely collapse. And I don't know if we would be able to survive that type of situation.
It certainly is fun to spitball it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what we're going to do in the next couple episodes, including today, we're going to go around the AFC West, kind of like the Eye of Sauron. We're going to peer into every nook and cranny of the Broncos division rivals. We'll factor in their respective draft hauls, free agent classes, figure out exactly what the state of the AFC West is. And we're going to get to the Oakland Raiders here today. But first, let me holler at you about being a Mile High Huddle premium member. Every week, Mile High Huddle saves our most analytical content for our premium members, whether it's something a little bit more long form or a film review, some X's and O's. We're doing film room breakdowns right now on each of the Broncos' 8 draft picks. And in fact, only one remains, cornerback Brandon Langley, that we haven't gotten to yet for our members. Will did an insightful film study on 5th-round tight end Jake Butt last week, I believe, for our premium members. And this is the type of content that we save for our subscribers. The news stories, those are always going to be free to all. But the in-depth analysis and any insider information we pick up along the way is going to be reserved for our premium members. And here's how it works. You have 2 options. You can sign up for a monthly membership, which costs $5 per month, or you can go annual, which costs $49 for the year. So by going annual, you save $11 annually, or for the year, whatever. And from there, you get access to all our premium content, including our members-only message boards. So as a site, we also give back to you as a member. You get benefits such as 10% off on all sporting tickets, including the Broncos, through Ticket Monster, as well as 10% off on Broncos team merchandise through Fanatics. So the best way to support Mile High Huddle and also Huddle Up is to go premium. It's what allows us to continue to bring you what we believe is the most in-depth, objective Broncos analysis on the web. So go to milehighhuddle.com, click the join button in the top menu bar, and sign up. We love you. We appreciate you. All right, let's talk about the Oakland Raiders here. Now, Jack Del Rio, of course, remains the head coach with Ken Norton Jr. as defensive coordinator. One of their gets of the offseason is they picked up former Chargers defensive coordinator John Pagano to be kind of a defensive coach / assistant head coach to Del Rio. To me, that's a huge get. But the Raiders also let former offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave go in order to promote QB's coach Todd Downing to the position. Now, Musgrave, who was an integral part to the development of Derek Carr, ended up getting hired by the Broncos to be assistant head coach and to help coach up the quarterbacks. With a 12-4 record going back to 2016, Oakland finished second in the AFC West behind the Chiefs, and then they had 7 Raiders voted to the Pro Bowl. Derek Carr, receiver Amari Cooper, center Rodney Hudson, guard Kelechi Osemele, tackle Donald Penn, and then 2 defenders, Khalil Mack, and safety Reggie Nelson. Now, most NFL talking heads view Oakland as the team to beat in the AFC West this year with a healthy Derek Carr. What I'm interested in, Will, is this whole Musgrave dynamic, though. I've been told that Downing, who, he's the younger coach, he's got more upward mobility, a little bit more momentum, was the real difference maker in Carr's development. But I've also been told by people who know that Musgrave was the key. And now the Broncos have Musgrave in Denver along with Mike McCoy, and the Broncos need as much quarterback knowledge and coaching and tutelage as they can get.
Right. So the thing about Bill Musgrave, and, we can debate which coach is responsible for his development because, we don't really know. I think the only guys that do know that are the guys inside the building in Oakland. But if you look at it, Derek Carr got better pretty incrementally every year from year one until he broke his leg at the end of the last season. But he had a good rookie season. They didn't win very much, but statistically he looked good, and he beat out Matt Schaub in the preseason, which I don't know how hard that was to do. but then he got better his second year. They weren't winning quite as consistently, but they jumped up from 3-13 to 7-9. So you have to say that's a market improvement.
And they beat Denver on the road.
Yeah, I was at that game, so that was a tough one to swallow.
Owie.
Yeah, I know. Year 3, he's an MVP candidate too. That's pretty rare that you can progress a guy that steadily and that evenly over the course of year 3, and that's kind of what every coach dreams about when they draft a quarterback. He's a rookie. We feel him out his first year. Second year, we're winning some more games. Statistically, he's getting a lot better. And then the third year he's an MVP candidate. That's exactly what you draw out when you draft a guy like that. So if we can get anything close to that with either of the quarterbacks, I think that's a huge get. That's a huge get for the Broncos.
Yeah, I'm really excited about how Musgrave can make an impact on the Broncos quarterback situation. We're going to get a much closer look when the Broncos kick off training camp, which I believe is July 24th on a Thursday. And, we'll get to see him in action. We'll get to see the preseason games between he and McCoy. I think the quarterbacks, and this isn't to take anything away from Gary Kubiak, but it goes back to that difference in paradigm where it's about fitting the system to the player's strengths rather than the reverse. And I think that's going to just suit where the Broncos are right now at the position with these young guys. They need coaches who can be flexible and who can make the most out of what they bring to the table right now. But on paper, you look at the Raiders, they are formidable. There's no doubt. I mean, this is an impressive team. But how did they do in free agency, and how did they do in the draft? We'll tackle free agency first. And really the number one thing to take away here was the acquisition of Marshawn Lynch via trade from Seattle. So he came out of retirement. Now he's back playing in his hometown in Oakland. That's a huge get if he's anywhere close to resembling the same form that he was in when he quote-unquote retired. Oakland also signed former Dolphins linebacker Jelani Jenkins, backup quarterback and former Bills first-rounder E.J. Manuel, former Packers and Rams tight end Jared Cook, former Vikings wideout and return specialist Cordarrelle Patterson, offensive tackle Marshall Newhouse. And so that's where Oakland gained talent, but we'll check out the free agent exodus that Oakland suffered. This is where I think as the team has to have some concerns. Of course, they lost Menelik Watson, who was a starter when healthy, took his talents to Denver. The Raiders lost 2 former starters in the secondary in safety Nate Allen and former top 15 pick DJ Hayden, a cornerback. They lost receiver Andre Holmes, who always seemed to show up against the Broncos for whatever reason. Matt McGloin, the quarterback, is gone. Defensive tackle Stacy McGee is gone. Starting linebacker and Super Bowl 48 MVP Malcolm Smith, gone. And then number 1 running back Latavius Murray is gone, but Marshawn Lynch should solve that problem. And then they lost one of their role-playing tight ends, Michael Rivera. So there was a few other role players that Oakland lost in free agency, but all in, you look at it from the surface, they lost 4 former starters on defense, 3 key offensive skill position players. And so, Will, you look at that. Before we get to the draft hall, what's your gut reaction on the key additions and departures in free agency, your takeaways?
Yeah, so the Marshawn Lynch thing is still kind of a mystery to me, and I don't I don't know what to expect, and I don't think anybody does, because his last year in Seattle was so bizarre. He played, he was hurt, and when he played all right, probably not up to his usual standard. And then there was that one game, I think, against Chicago where he didn't come out of the tunnel until like the second quarter. So who knows what you're going to get in Oakland with him. But moving past that, I think the big priority for them was the secondary, and that kind of became apparent when Brock Osweiler lit them up in the wild card game. And anytime you're getting lit up by Brock Osweiler at any point in the season, you know that you have a few holes to plug.
Yeah, you better double check that situation.
Right, you gotta address that pretty quickly. Sean Smith, who was the prize of their free agent class a year ago, at least defensively, got abused by DeAndre Hopkins, and so did David Amerson. And they addressed that in the draft, so we'll talk about that when Carl comes on. But another thing that kind of stuck out to me was they fell apart when they lost Derek Carr. And then after that, when they lost Matt McGloin even further, I don't know how far they're going with McGloin even, but so Matt McGloin leaves, he signs with the Philadelphia Eagles, and they pick up E.J. Manuel as the second quarterback behind Carr. And I don't know what you think, but I don't think E.J. Manuel is as good as Matt McGloin. And I think that was a big area that they needed to address. They absolutely fell off when they lost Derek Carr. They were lost.
Yeah.
And they didn't fix that, and they got worse, I think. So many eggs are in that Carr basket now.
Yep. And that's the issue with Oakland right now, is just being top heavy at the quarterback position. It's all and really that's the crux of the NFL is it's a quarterback league, and the Broncos, if you try and look at the bright side, with even though right now we're lacking clarity on the quarterback position, the Broncos do have the balance and the depth of roster to keep this team in games week in and week out without the quarterback absolutely lighting it up. Now you add a proficient and difference-making quarterback to that equation, and the sky's the limit. The Denver Broncos will be a very hard team to beat once they get their quarterback, or if they get their quarterback situation stabilized. But you talk about McGloin leaving and then bringing in, I should say, E.J. Manuel. What does that say about Connor Cook? Because, Derek Carr, yeah, he suffered that leg injury late in the season, but he hadn't struggled with injuries up until that point. And Connor Cook was taken relatively high in the draft. He wasn't a first rounder, but they invested in him. It's kind of a referendum a little bit on, I think, what they saw from Connor Cook in his 2 starts last year.
Yeah, that was a bizarre situation dating back to the 2016 draft. He was in the same class with Goff, Wentz, then Paxton Lynch, and then Dak Prescott. And people thought that he was an option for the Broncos at the end of the first round. If you'll remember, he was kind of seen pretty widely as like a consensus, if not first round, then top 40, 45 pick.
And he was getting mocked to the Broncos quite often.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously they ended up going with Lynch, but he fell to the 4th round, and it wasn't for any, there wasn't any like glaring hole in his game necessarily. I don't know if he has a great arm, but he had some real leadership issues at Michigan State. There's that whole storyline about never being voted as a captain.
And no one came to his birthday party or whatever.
Yeah, I think you might be confusing that with a certain Kevin Costner movie.
I was just going to say that, dude. It's like
I wouldn't be surprised if that happened with Connor Cook too.
I was just going to say that is I'm confusing it with draft day, but the reason I did is I actually had somebody who knows their Michigan State Spartans compare. Right. You talk about Connor Cook, his leadership, his character, and all that. Compare him to the fictional, I should say, Bo Callahan from that movie.
Right, and Bo Callahan might have ended up being a better pick for the Raiders in the 4th round. But anytime you have a quarterback that's being compared to the villain in a Kevin Costner movie, I think you have problems.
Well put. Well, let's look at their cap space real quick before we get to the draft hall and bring Carl in. Now, according to Spot Track, the Raiders have $17.8 million in still available cap space after paying Carr. That kind of surprised me when I researched it. They have the 12th most, in fact, cap space in the NFL, with the Broncos checking in at 22nd, who currently have $11.5 million in available cap. And again, this is according to Spot Track. Now, the league average is $18.8 million right now in available cap. Every year, NFL teams, they try to reserve a little cap space for the end of the preseason or training camp when the injury bug tends to strike. And we saw, as you talked about Evan Mathis a few minutes ago, we saw the Broncos do it in 2015. And the Raiders, they can afford to sign a couple of guys with that kind of money if the need calls for it. But Khalil Mack, he's still waiting to get paid. He's a 2014 first-round pick, number 5 overall. And this is a guy, Will Mack, entering his 4th year, but the Raiders just extended his 5th-year option. So really, we can talk about, hey, Oakland's going to have to pay Mack pretty soon too, but they really don't have to do anything until after the 2018 season at the latest. They could always extend him earlier, but the Oakland Raiders have time. And honestly, if you look at their cap space from 10,000 feet, their salary cap situation as it is today, it doesn't look as dire as you might think following the Carr contract.
No, it doesn't yet. But once I think they do have to pay Mack, and they're going to have to pay Mack, if they wait, because, if you're the front office, and this is different from Mack's perspective, you want to try to sign him as early as you can, because that number, the longer you wait, that number is only going to get higher and higher. And if you think about how much the Broncos paid Von Miller last offseason, and people tend to see Mack as a better player, or at least someone that's on par with Von Miller, they're going to have to pay him pretty close to what they paid Derek Carr, which is around $25 million a year.
That's a good point.
And I'm not a big math guy, as you know, but if you think about Derek Carr and Khalil Mack, and you put their 2 annual salaries together, you're getting close to about a third of the overall cap for your team. So you have nearly a third of your cap space tied into 2 players, and the other 2 tied into the remaining 49 players that count towards your cap. I don't know if that's a great situation to be in. But at the same time, what do you do? It's a good problem to have, but you can't just kick Khalil Mack to the curb.
And it's funny, you think back. I remember, I don't recall exactly off the top of my head. I maybe should have researched this before the show, but that year they signed Charles Woodson back from Green Bay. They had so much cap space, and after a decade of sustained failure in the AFC West, they could not recruit a top-line free agent to save their lives. I mean, let's face it, Chuck Wood returned as a sentimental – the Broncos actually tried to sign Charles Woodson, for those who might remember. The Broncos pursued Charles Woodson in free agency and actually offered him more money than Oakland, but he chose to re-sign with Oakland, where he began his career, to kind of complete the circle, so to speak. But there was a time there where, I don't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but they had $60,000, $70,000, kind of like what the San Francisco 49ers have had available to them this time around in cap space, but they just couldn't recruit any free agents. And then the dominoes began to fall after they got Del Rio. You saw Rodney Hudson sign, and then pretty soon, things started coalescing, and here we are today. And I just think overall, right now, that the Raiders still, we can talk about how they're getting into that zone where they lost the opportunity to compete for a world championship with a quarterback on the cheap. But their cap space, I think this year, if this draft class, and we'll find out more about that here in a few minutes, and their free agent class can make an impact, Oakland still has a great chance to strike while the iron's hot before they have to pay Khalil Mack, before they have to pay other guys on the offensive line.
Right. I think I should clarify that I don't think their window for winning a championship is closed whatsoever. But when you're paying Derek Carr that much, he has to be worth it. He can't turn into, like we saw with Joe Flacco or, Colin Kaepernick, because that sets you back a long way. And we saw what happened with the Baltimore Ravens after they're basically forced to pay Joe Flacco at that time the highest contract in NFL history, and then subsequently missing the playoffs for 3 out of the next 4 years. That's kind of a part of the catch-22. So if you do have to pay him that much, you can survive if he is living up to what his contract kind of how his contract places him in relation to the other quarterbacks, which, if you think about it, he has to play like a top 5 quarterback for it to be worth it.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to the draft. The Raiders took 9 players, and we're going to actually welcome in Mile High Huddle analyst and one of Huddle Up's very own co-hosts, the man himself, Carl Dumler, to help us break down Oakland's draft class. Carl, how are you, my friend? Thanks for joining us.
I am doing great. It is a beautiful Saturday here, and my family and I have done nothing but relax, so it's been a good day.
That's my type of Saturday. Now, Carl, along with Nick Kendall and Eric Trickle, they invest a ton of time into scouting the college ranks with an eye, of course, toward the NFL draft. Now, Will and I, we have our opinions, but far be it from us to label ourselves officially draftniks. Carl is, however, in fact, one of the most knowledgeable draft analysts in Broncos country, and we wanted to tap into that knowledge base, that draft brain for this segment. Now, Carl and Nick, for those of you who remember, did a deep dive on the AFC West, the draft halls back, I think it was early May. But as Will and I go around the AFC West, we thought we'd better get Carl on the horn, revisit this issue again. So, getting back to the Raiders, again, 9 players drafted this past spring. They are as follows. In the first round, they took cornerback Garyon Conley out of Ohio State. Second round, they took safety Obi Melifonwu out of Connecticut. Third round, they took defensive lineman Eddie Vanderdoes. I don't even know how you say that, Carl.
I think it's Vanderdoes.
Vanderdoes, thank you, out of UCLA. Fourth round, tackle David Sharp out of Florida. Fifth round, linebacker Markel Lee out of Wake Forest, and then they had 4 seventh-round picks. Safety Shalom Luani from Washington State, another tackle. Jalen Ware out of Alabama State, running back Elijah Hood, North Carolina, and then last, defensive tackle Trayvon Hester out of Toledo. So right off the bat, obviously Oakland made it a priority to bolster that kind of fledgling secondary that we saw. They lost quite a bit of talent in the their free agent departures. So you got Garyon Conley, who has some major off-the-field troubles, considered, from what I understand, Carl, and we'll get your take on this, to be one of the top corners in this draft class. Safety Obi Melifonwu, I mean, he broke the NFL scouting combine with his workout. And then Vanderdoes, my bad.
Vanderdoes, there you go, yep.
And then Vanderdoes helps their defensive interior. So, Carl, we can go through each pick if we need to, but let me just ask you this. In your mind, did the Raiders kind of jump the shark in taking Conley that early, considering this off-the-field drama, or was he just one of these guys that was so good that he was worth the risk?
I've been told there was a lot of teams that were very shocked the Raiders took him this high because they were not as comfortable with the whole off-the-field issues and that he was going to be found innocent. You know, the Raiders kept, saying after the draft, oh, we're not even worried about that. But I've seen the story begin to change and, what's all developed and what all happened and his story. I don't know. It's a whole mess. And so to me,
update our listeners on what that story is, like what he was involved in.
Well, the story goes that he was out clubbing with some friends and went up to his hotel room and had invited this girl, supposedly when they were in the elevator, to come up and be a part of a very bad party. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to exactly word that to make it radio friendly here, but
earmuff children.
Yeah. Anyway, he kind of denied that any of this all happened, and now it's come out that he says, well, something did happen, but it was all,
consensual,
on the up and up. Yeah, everybody agreed to it, all that kind of stuff, and so it's a whole mess. Should have never put himself in that position. You're a couple weeks from the draft, and that's what you decide to go do. Like, you got to know people are out there to get you. So I don't know how it's all going to play out. It seems pretty quiet right now.
Yeah, I thought the timing was a little. It was definitely poor timing for Conley, but I don't think it's shocking that the Raiders end up being the team that take a chance on him late in the first round. But kind of moving to a more on the field perspective on Conley, how much do you think that he benefited from playing in that Ohio State secondary where he had fellow first round picks Marshawn Lattimore and Malik Hooker kind of helping him out?
Honestly, I think he held his own very well. They put him on an island a lot. They did that to both their corners with Lattimore and him, and allowed their safeties just to kind of roam around and go make plays. And so that, in that sense, I think he actually is a very good player, only allowed a 37% completion rate. throw in his direction. So he's a very strong corner. He fits the size, speed combo that you're looking for. The big thing that I have against this pick, at least for on the field, he played a lot of press man corner. The Raiders don't play that a whole lot. They're more of an off-ball man zone coverage kind of person, and that's not his game. He doesn't have the hips to really flip and go once the guy kind of gets to him 10 yards out or whatever. He's not really a downhill come and make a play, like you see with Talib all the time.
Yeah.
And they did the same thing with Sean Smith. When they got him, I had Raiders fans telling me left and right, oh, man, this is a huge signing. We just hurt one of our rivals, and we just got a great player. And
right.
I say he's a great player, but I don't think he's a great fit. And he struggled.
Yep.
So that's my big thing why I don't exactly like this pick. I'm not as high as some others on this one.
And really quick, where do you think he does fit in with David Amerson and Sean Smith on the outside?
Well, he played pretty much mostly on the outside. He did play a little bit of nickel on the inside there in the slot, but I don't know. I don't think he's a great fit there either. Like I said, with his hips being a little bit tighter, you need those hips to be able to flip either way. And so I could see him really struggling if they put him in that slot position.
Now, my depth of knowledge when it comes to this draft class is, it's pretty surface. I'll put that out on the front level. It's pretty surface knowledge what I know about this group. But if I were to say my personal favorite, if I look at that draft haul the Raiders got this year, what jumps out to me is the safety in the second round, Melifonwu. For you, Carl, personally, what was your favorite Raiders draft pick? And then conversely, of course, what do you think was their worst when you look at that draft haul?
I would actually go the third round with Eddie Vanderdoes, defensive tackle of UCLA. If I had one way of describing the Raiders draft, it's very high risk, high reward, boom bust, whatever you want to call it. Because a lot of these guys, they have some issues. And Vanderdoes was that he had a torn ACL and missed pretty much the entire 2015 season. And then 2016, he comes back and he didn't look all that good. He looked slow, looked out of shape, put on a lot of weight, just not that same player that showed promise back in 2014. But I've heard when he got to the Senior Bowl, he had lost some weight and had really gotten some of his explosion back, showed that power, that speed that was really starting to show up earlier. And so I could see that being a really good pick. And one, he's going to get starting experience right off the bat. They lost two guys in Stacey McGee and Dan Williams.
Right.
And they need somebody up the middle to be that run stuffer to really, be able to take on those double teams. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be a good pick for them.
We've kind of seen that with our own guy, Adam Gotsis, where it takes a little while after a torn ACL. There's kind of a buffer year in between where you kind of have to get back in shape, lose a little bit of weight after having to rehab for so long. But Carl, give us a little sleeper here, whether it's one of the first few selections, a mid or a late round pick, or whoever. Who do you think is going to pay huge dividends, kind of that no one's talking about for the Raiders?
I'm going to go a really, really far down guy here in the 7th round. Actually, I know Jalen Ware, offensive tackle of Alabama State. He was not a guy talked about a whole lot. He kind of. Honestly, for my radar, he only came on the radar about 2 weeks before the draft. Somebody had said, hey, has anybody heard of this guy? And so everybody was trying to find tape on this kid. And he has very good athleticism. Has very good feet. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Sambrelo of great feet. Needs to add some strength, needs to work on technique. But he's kind of a 2-year project, but that kind of works out well with Donald Penn. Right. You kind of expect that's when he's going to about fall off. And so I could see this guy actually kind of working his way and getting that 2 years of practice and seeing some of the top guys. He's got, good mentors in Donald Penn and others to really show him how to really improve himself. And he has time to add that muscle without having to tear up his body too much. So that's one I like. So
they lost Menelik Watson, as we talked about earlier in the show, of course, to the Broncos. But as you mentioned, Donald Penn. And I haven't researched this, but I assume Austin Howard returns for right tackle. But they do need some depth, which is why they ended up, I guess, taking 2 tackles in this class.
Yeah, and I'm not very good. I'm not very high on David Sharp. You'd kind of asked a little bit earlier about my least favorite pick. That's probably it. Okay. He is a monster of a man. Behemoth is what I like to call him. 357 pounds, but he doesn't have very good movement. He's about as stiff as they come for an offensive tackle from Florida. he's late getting off the ball sometimes. He actually, this was reported, and he denies it, but there's enough people out there saying this is true. He is almost blind in his right eye.
Wow.
And so they were saying that sometimes causes some issues of getting off the ball, of having to watch, you got to keep your eye on the ball to see when it's snapped, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I could see him. He's probably going to have to move inside to me. And so that was one of those picks. I'm like, what? Your biggest need is on the offensive line is right tackle, and this guy doesn't really fit that all that well. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that one. And like I said, I'm higher on their other offensive tackle from the 7th round. So
right.
And guard is the strength of that offensive line far and away. They have Rodney Hudson at center, and then they have this Kelechi Osemele over at left guard, and they still have to pay Gabe Jackson, who's turning into one of the best guards. So it is kind of a head scratcher to pick a tackle who they would eventually have to move inside that high in the draft.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so that's, like I said, that's why it's my least favorite pick, because I don't really see him getting on the field unless there's quite a few injuries.
Now, this is kind of a big picture question, and you've touched on it a little bit, but as someone who knows the college ranks, we want to know how you feel overall about the Raiders' 2017 draft haul. You can grade it if you want, but as Will and I talked about earlier in the show, with the Raiders allocating so much of their cap now to Derek Carr, and they're soon going to have to follow suit with Khalil Mack, they're going to have to pay Gabe Jackson, as Will just mentioned. I mean, they need this crop of rookies, along with the last couple of draft classes, to make an impact if they're going to sustain this competitive level of football that we saw last year. In your mind, Carl, do you think they did that in 2017?
I don't think they're going to get as much immediate return on this draft as they would hope. Like I said, I think Vanderdoes will start, and I think Conley will. I mean, he's got to find his way to the field. You don't spend a first-round pick on a guy not, unless, it's a quarterback and they need some time to develop. But
yeah.
Obi Melifonwu, he's more athlete than football player right now, and he'll get some time on the field, but he's slow in reaction, and I think the game's going to be very, very fast for him to start off with. So I think he's going to need a year. Yeah. So for that secondary that struggled last year, I don't know if you really did enough to really improve it. Conley helps, but it's just, like I said, I don't know how great of a fit he is for their team. So he's going to struggle just to kind of get used to playing more off ball, and unless they change up their defense, which I don't see Del Rio doing. He's kind of a stickler for his system works kind of guy.
And we saw that in Denver for a couple years.
Right.
The Raiders took Carl Joseph, who was another safety, in the first round of last year's draft. How do you think he did in his first year?
I thought he did well, especially in the year. He started out really struggling a lot. Missed some tackles, just was late getting to a play, all that kind of stuff. But he really came on strong as the season went on. I do question a little bit of moving forward. He is small for his position, and especially for the way that he plays. He is a big time hitter, wants to go make a big play, all those kind of things. And, he's very small for that. So I worry he's going to have a little bit of wear and tear. He's already shown that in college with some injury concerns. I mean, that's why he dropped in the draft a little bit.
Yeah.
And but I think he could be a big boost for them this year. I think he could be that playmaker that they really need on that secondary.
Well, this is the insight from a true draftnik on the Raiders draft class. Now, for those who missed it, Carl did an excellent film breakdown on Broncos 6th-round running back D'Angelo Henderson last week. Carl also broke down second-rounder DeMarcus Walker a little bit, a few weeks before that. But, Carl, for the listeners and, of course, Mile High Huddle members and readers, what do you have in the works? What can everybody look forward to in your next published article?
Well, I'm kind of focusing on another player here. I am focusing on Menelik Watson and doing a little bit of breakdown of what he could bring to the team if he can stay healthy. That's always been his big question mark. But, just to see what kind of player we got in him. Can he be a real true upgrade at the right tackle position, which isn't hard to do with what we had last year.
Yeah, no doubt.
But no, I just wanted to take a look at him and just kind of see what he might bring to the table, and if he could be one of those great, value signings that Elway does so great with.
Well, absolutely. We appreciate you joining us, Carl. That's all the time we have for today's show. Look forward to that piece on Menelik Watson. It'll be the first time we've actually addressed him in a film breakdown at Mile High Huddle this year. So look forward to that. Find Carl on Twitter, at Carl Dumler, MHH. Follow the show on Twitter, at HuddleUpPod. You can find Will in the Twitterverse, at WillKeys6, and myself, at Chad N. Jensen. Tweet us your questions, and we will try to address your concerns on the show as often as we can. And don't forget to subscribe, y'all. For Will, for Carl, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.